トビデオ
I think we all had that one anime we watched as a very young kid and had no idea it was an anime until years later. In fact, I think this concept could be applied to most anime aimed specifically at young children in mind. Whereas anime that's aimed at teen or adult demographics have their list of tropes that are tied to the medium and its country of origin, anime that are aimed at families and younger audiences tend to be a lot more universal in their content. We can see this in the films of Studio Ghibli. The themes and atmosphere of their films tend to draw a lot more from traditional stories, fairy tales, history, and classical literature over Japanese pop cultural ephemera from the past 40 years. Because of this, Ghibli films are some of the most accessible anime out there for non-anime fans around, because their stories can be tied to and compared to stories they are also familiar with. My Neighbor Totoro, for instance, not only draws from the universal experiences and overall imagination of childhood, but also the general feel of a fairy tale. When a young child watches My Neighbor Totoro, they might unconsciously draw comparisons to the other fairy tale films they've seen, such as Disney's Beauty and the Beast. It doesn't matter that the two of them are very different stories from two very different sources. To them, the magic that enchants an entire castle is the same magic that can grow an entire tree. So it's no wonder that Studio Ghibli films are some of the most accessible animes for families and audiences. Okay, not every Studio Ghibli film, but you get the idea. But with that universal appeal, the market on children's anime is squarely in Ghibli's court. Sure, the deal they have with Disney doesn't hurt, but even before that, a lot of the kids' animes that young kids were shown in the 90s were stuff like Kiki's Delivery Service and the aforementioned My Neighbor Totoro. Studio Ghibli's dominance has ensured that other anime aimed at families and young audiences remained obscure in its shadow, anime that are destined to get a cult followings at best. Anime such as this one. (1995's) Catnapped tells the story of two kids, Toriyasu and his sister Miko. They've lost their dog Papadol and have no idea where he is. But one night they get the answer to their question in the form of three anthropomorphic cat scientists who tell them to come to their world, Banapal Wits, a magical world on top of a giant sleeping cat inhabited by other anthropomorphic cats. The reason why the cat scientists need the children to come in the first place is to come get Papadol, who looks different. Being exposed to the magical son of Banapal Wit, Papadol has turned into a gigantic monster. This in turn has called Banapal Wit's spoiled rotten princess Bubarina to take Papadol as her pet and use him as a force of destruction as a means to threaten the citizens and give her complete and absolute control of the kingdom. Turning into kittens themselves, Toriyasu and Miko have to join a rebellion of cats to stop Bubarina while retrieving Papadol and bringing him back to the real world. However, they only have 24 hours to do so, otherwise they too will be exposed to the long-term effects of Banapal Wit's son and share the same fate as Papadol. Unless you were one of the few who actually saw this movie, or were one of the many who saw the trailer that was on every Sailor Moon VHS that ended up spoiling the entire goddamn movie, chances are Catnapped is unknown territory for you. But if you saw it as a kid, no doubt Catnapped left an impression. It's colorful, it's imaginative, but most of all, it's weird. Catnapped honestly looked like it had a ton of ambition behind it all. An epic, imaginative, fantastical story that could have rivaled that of Studio Ghibli. Fully realizing that ambition, however... well, I wouldn't call Catnapped a glorious catastrophe that had an idea that it fully failed to capitalize on. Oh no, far from it. It's really more like a good movie that had the potential to have been a great movie, and in a way that's infinitely more frustrating. So we have to ask, what exactly made Catnapped unique in that it showed it was a project that was aiming for the stars to create a masterful work? And what is it exactly that caused it to fall short of its initial goals? Well, to start things off, let's take a look at that animation, shall we? That gloriously glorious animation that injects pure essence of rainbows into your waiting eye sockets. Its approach to style filled with an unhinged imagination that bleeds bedlam. A technicolor nightmare that's also a beautiful, colorful dream.
The colors, Duke! The colors!
Catnapped's animation direction is certainly one of a kind. And we have this man to thank. Takashi Nakamura is one of the more unconventional animators in the annals of old anime, as well as one of the more obscure. His track record is comparatively thin when stacked up against his colleagues, but that really hasn't stopped him from having a distinct, recognizable style. And Catnapped seems like it was his baby because not only is he the director, but he is also the animation director, co-screenwriter, and character designer. Nakamura's character designs have a very Tezuka feel to them with how they use basic shapes in forming a silhouette, but still have a sense of realism to them that make them stand out without dipping too far into the uncanny valley. It ultimately fits the film with how the children can fit into the world of cats so easily without their transformations feeling like a drastic change in character models. But Nakamura's strong suit is how he can give the feeling of pure, unadulterated chaos. He's shown this specialty before in his contribution to 1987's Robot Carnival with his short Chicken Man and Redneck, but whereas that was a dark and terrifying example of chaos, here it's whimsical, as well as being kind of terrifying. The scene where this is best shown is in the Climactic Chase that takes up a good part of the film. It's a scene that involves a number of things going on at once. Giant dogs, MC Escher stairs, fireworks, inflatable aristocrats, giant balloons, hypnotism, and time that is about to run out. But it all manages to come together in this organized discord and makes for an exciting climax. But we can't give all the credit to Nakamura. Animation is a collaborative medium after all, and Nakamura did assemble some of the best people to collaborate. A good example would be the psychedelic background drawings of Shinji Kimura, since his specialty has always been trippy, otherworldly backdrops. And there's also the diverse skill sets shown by his staff of key animators. He knows when and where to assign animators to certain shots, and it always makes the shot look good. Toyoaki Imura's talent for drawing scenes of sublime beauty is used to great effect, as well as the flip side of Tatsuyuki Tanaka's wacky character animations also being used to great effect. But while the animation is an achievement for how magical and delightfully madcap it can be, it ultimately really needs a good, complete story to better complement it. Okay, so you know those Don Bluth films from the early 90s? The ones that initially began with a grand vision in mind that was reflected through its stellar animation quality, but were ultimately held back by a script and storyboard that either went through several rewrites or had to be rushed out before the fine-tuning process could truly begin, or else funding would get pulled, and the final result feels like a well-animated yet half-finished mess? Well, Catnapped doesn't go that far, but it honestly gets dangerously close. To better understand it, let's look at Catnapped through its typical 3-act structure. Act 1. We are first introduced to our main characters of Toriyasu and Miko and the problem they begin the movie with. They have lost their dog and have no idea where he is. Later, Toriyasu and Miko are taken to Bonaparte Wit by the cat scientist in what is known as the Point of Attack, an event that sets the plot in motion that is outside the protagonist's control. When they get to Bonaparte Wit, the children turn into kittens, they find out that Papadol has turned into a monster, and Miko is soon thereafter kidnapped by Papadol. This is what is called the Inciting Incident. Conflict is immediately thrust on an unwilling Toriyasu, and thus he is given the motivation needed to be the proper protagonist of the story. End of Act 1. Act 2. Toriyasu meets and familiarizes himself with the characters that will help along with his journey, such as the old wizard Sanada and the warrior Chuchu, and with their help he is able to get the tools needed to save both Papadol and Miko. We are also introduced to our antagonist Bubarina, along with her evil plan and her overall backstory through the perspective of Miko. Eventually, the story reaches its midpoint when the secret mission to turn Papadol back to normal and steal him away from Bubarina goes awry, thus causing the aforementioned chase scene involving nearly every main character at some point. This is known as the Confrontation. After some wacky moments, Bubarina's assistant Dodo begins to mock Toriyasu about why Papadol ran away in the first place. This causes Toriyasu to remember a time where he got teased by a group of neighborhood bullies and began to take his anger out on Papadol. This is known as the Twist. Realizing how bad he treated Papadol, Toriyasu says he doesn't deserve to have a dog like him and is brought to his lowest point, thus signaling the end of Act 2. Finally, we have Act 3. Toriyasu is snapped out of his depression by thinking about the words said to him by Master Sanada and remembers how much Papadol means to him. Papadol in turn remembers him and suddenly begins to not follow Bubarina's orders. The extended chase soon reaches its climax with Toriyasu turning Papadol back to normal, escaping Bubarina, and rescuing Miko all before the sun rises. And with that, the story reaches its denouement with the kids having their dog back and remembering the grand adventure they had, with Toriyasu having grown less cynical and more appreciative of the pet he calls a friend. On paper, this looks to be an airtight 3-act structure. Everything has a proper introduction and setup, given a direction to where the story needs to go, and ends with the problem solved and our characters having grown from their adventure. However, when put into motion, examining the story becomes a lot trickier. Catnapped as a film suffers due to its uneven pacing. Act 1 of Catnapped is the best paced part of the film. It sets up everything from the characters to the setting at a speed that can hook the audience in by the 15-minute mark. When Act 2 begins, on the other hand, it can feel a bit directionless. The plan for how Toriyasu is going to get back Papadol and Miko is pretty much laid out within the first 5 minutes of the act, so the time spent between that and getting to the palace in the first place is devoted to a lot of world building and character backstory. We'll put a pin in that for now. And then the midpoint happens and we are just off to the races. 40% of this movie is devoted to this one big chase between all of our characters that gradually keeps getting crazier, wilder, and above all else, faster. The fast pace of the anime past the midpoint has some big pros as well as some big cons. On one hand, the fast pace of the latter half is completely justified by the chaotic pace of the events happening on screen, as well as the fact that Toriyasu and Miko are on a time limit before the sun rises and are transformed to monsters. This fast pace fits the animation as well, building the proper tension for the events leading up to the climax, with the cat scientists shouting out the minutes they have left as they struggle to get Papadol back. On the other hand, the frenetic pace from the midpoint onward leaves little room for downtime. The darkest hour that Toriyasu has, which is essential for his character development, only lasts a minute before he has his epiphany and is able to turn Papadol back to normal. But we really can't blame Catnapped itself for how weirdly its 3-act structure is paced out, because it might not be following a 3-act narrative in the first place. The 3-act structure is an invention of Western origin, having its start in ancient Greek theater before becoming a staple in Hollywood cinema. So it would stand to reason that Japanese stories have traditionally different approaches to narrative structure. Japanese narratives use the Kisho Tenketsu method, a 4-act structure seen in traditional narratives throughout East Asia. The 4 acts include an introduction, a development, a twist, and a brief conclusion that wraps up everything. We see that structure in stuff such as 4-koma manga or video game level design, which are more short form if anything, but the same structure could be subconsciously applied to Catnapped. We are introduced to the plot and characters and world, the movie develops said plot, characters, and world, we get an unexpected development that changes what we know about the story, and all of it is swiftly wrapped up in the conclusion. So in short, Catnapped's odd pacing could be due to the fact that the anime is applying both traditional Japanese narrative structures with traditional Western narrative structures, resulting in a story that's solidly built but rushed in its execution. And as a result, this type of pacing, while good for building tension and excitement and help bring to life a chaotic energy on screen, has some unintended consequences in how it affects the overall writing of Catnapped. Okay, so remember that thing we put a pin in a few minutes ago? How Act 2 can feel a little slow and directionless because of how much time it spends developing character backstories and world building? There's a reason for that. Some people might say that said reason would be because these moments of world building and character backstory don't advance the plot in a meaningful way. One example would be the moment in the story where they devote a scene to explaining how the moon in Banapal Wit is a result of a forbidden romance between a cat and a mouse. It's beautiful, but some people might criticize such a scene for being pointless world building because it does nothing to advance the plot. It's not a Chekhov's gun or anything, it's just a nice bit of world building. But here's the thing, overly nitpicky media critics of YouTube. Things that happen in the story aren't always there to get from one plot point to another. Sometimes they are there to develop a character, or to set a mood, or even just make the world feel a little more alive, such as what this scene does right here. However, with as much time the movie spends on the scene, it ultimately does feel pointless. Not because it doesn't advance the plot, but because it has little narrative or thematic payoff. So we get the scene with the moon, the mouse, and the cat. We cut back to the ship with Toriyasu, Chuchu, and the 3 scientists who tell Toriyasu the meaning behind the moon and its story. But before they can go into more detail about the story, Toriyasu has to play CinemaSins and poke holes in the premise by saying, "Why would a cat fall in love with a mouse?"
そりゃ猫とネズミじゃあね。無理無理。
何が無理よ。猫とネズミのどこが悪いの？
だって猫ってネズミ食べちゃうんだぜ。
The only payoff this scene gives us is that Toriyasu is a cynical spoilsport who refuses to give in to his sense of wonder. Information we already know thanks to his conversations with Miko at the beginning of the film.
UFO だとかさ、エイリアンだとかそんなの全部嘘。ミーコもな、いつまでもそんなの信じてると後悔するからな。ミーコしないもん。
And his initial reaction to being taken on this journey.
騙されるなミーコ。こいつら猫のふりしてるけど本当は人さらいだぞ。
It also shows Chuchu's disappointment at how her first impression of human is this whiny, unimaginative little dork.
あんたたちの世界と違うのよ、バーカ。まったく、人間が来るって楽しみにしてたのに、こんなずんぐりが来てがっかり。
But that was established in a previous scene when they first met.
バカな。誰が猫なんか好きになるかよ。
猫なんかってどういう意味よ。
So as it stands, the moon scene is just a scene that just happens and has no further bearing on the narrative. We don't even get the full details of how the tragic romance between the cat and the mouse led to the mouse being forced to pull the moon across the sky every night. And that's the perfect microcosm for most of Catnapped's story problems. Lots of build-up and promise for little to no payoff. The first half is front-loaded with character subplots that are expected to go somewhere, but ultimately don't end up going anywhere. You have subplots like Chuchu's slow acceptance of Toriyasu, which is a subplot that really only appears to exist in the background as it's introduced and solved with very little fanfare. We only get a few lines about how Toriyasu is the first human she's ever met and how much of a letdown that is, but then they begin to respect one another because they save each other's lives in the big chase scene. And honestly, Chuchu's character arc feels very underutilized as she only exists to get Toriyasu out of danger and vice versa. But at least Chuchu's arc gets completed. Her brother Dodo, on the other hand, has a subplot that is completely forgotten by the time the second half rolls around. It's established pretty early that Dodo is not Buburina's bumbling henchman entirely by choice, but was actually Master Sanada's helpful apprentice who was accidentally exposed to an enchanted painting of Buburina that brainwashed him and caused him to fall madly in love with her. But by the time the big chase rolls around, that subplot gets completely forgotten and he's reduced to a maniacally laughing second banana. He doesn't even get cured of his brainwashing by the end of the film. I even don't think Chuchu or Master Sanada really voices that much concern for the state of mind of someone who was their brother or prized pupil. But the character who gets it the worst through lack of subplot payoff is Princess Buburina. In the first half, Buburina is the character who has just as much setup as Toriyasu himself. She is firmly established as someone who can flip the switch from sweet-talking sadist to shrieking, flailing woman baby. A personality really brought to light by Noriko Hidaka's performance.
魔女だと。世界中の王子が心寄せるこの美しい姫の子の私をあの醜い魔女と一緒にしようって。
Ladies and gentlemen, Rule 63, Prince John. But there is a lot of time in the first half of the movie that is devoted to implying that Buburina is something more than just a one-note, spoiled, rotten villain. The direction of the film implies that she was once loved throughout the kingdom and that her birth was a time of great celebration. But since her parents spoiled her, she became a rotten child who eventually grew up into a rotten ruler. And even though she has assigned her parents to a terrible fate after taking over the kingdom, it's clear they've been trying to reason with her for a long time because they still love her. Buburina is portrayed as someone who doesn't appreciate the love other people give her despite her terribleness, and this ties into what appears to be her character's subplot. Throughout the first half, there's a lot of talk about how Princess Buburina is someone who needs to be taught a lesson.
まったくのブブリーナが勝手をするためにかけられた悪意ある魔法とも思えんのじゃがもしかすればブブリーナを変えられる何か深い意味があるのかもしれん。
There's an extended flashback scene going over the origin of Princess Buburina's balloonification powers, how her spoiled nature caused her to be involved in the death of the court magician's young daughter, and how the magician subsequently cursed her with her powers until she learned the true sorrow of losing someone or something she unconditionally loves. This flashback is set between two scenes of Booberina fawning over Pop Doll like a little girl would do to her pet puppy, pretty much all but implying that Papa Doll is not just a tool to scare her subjects into submission, but also one of the few creatures Booberina shows genuine, no strings attached affection for. It all appears to be a perfectly crafted setup for Booberina to be defeated by having Papa Doll take Toriyasu back, thus causing Booberina to lose Papa Doll forever, and thereby be uncursed and lose her powers altogether. It's a possibility that not only gives Booberina a good humiliating defeat, but also gives her a chance at a possible redemption by having her learn a lesson about empathy. The actual movie just opts to give her a humiliating defeat by placing her on a sinking platform and have her scream about how much she hates water. We get no inkling about whether she noticed she'll never get Papa Doll back, or even if she still has her powers. And when the kids ask the appropriate question of whether they should just let Booberina go after all she's done, it all gets hand waved away with a, "Oh, don't worry, I'm sure she's learned her lesson."
サンダラ様がいつか言ってたよ。姫様は欲しがるばっかりだからいけないって。与えることに気づかないんだよ。
まあ、姫も少しは懲りておとなしくしてるだろうって。
Except that gets completely quashed right before the end credits as the cats come back needing the kids' help again, implying Booberina didn't learn a lesson and now the anime ends in a cliffhanger waiting for a sequel that will never come. You see, this is what I mean when I say that Catnapped is frustrating. Because despite its seemingly strong structure of the main storyline, a lot of the subplots are left unfinished, making the film have this incomplete feel to it. But at the same time, it's not a bad movie. I mean, it falls short of its ambition, sure, but it's still imaginative. It's still filled with a childlike sense of wonder. It's an anime that revels in all things that can make animation stunningly beautiful and wonderfully deranged. Catnapped is a weirdly paced and not fully there story, but that doesn't mean it's not worth your time. It's a good example that not all family-friendly anime needs to be from Studio Ghibli. Sometimes it can be that small weird little project that sticks forever in your mind, regardless of its faults.
君が